Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Stephen Falgout.
And I am your other host, Don Falgu. Get Recc'd is our podcast where Steven and I, two siblings, get together and recommend each other each a piece of media, be it a film, an album, a TV show, whatever. And then we get back in the next episode and discuss those recommendations.
And what a list of recommendations we have today.
Yeah.
This, of course, is the big 55. We're over the hill now, as they would say. Getting right into the swing of nearing retirement, where we retire our podcast forever.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed it while it lasted. I know that we have been a little unclear about the future of the podcast. We just didn't want to let you down. If you knew that we were going to be ending at like episode 63, which is a weird one to end on, I just don't know why you would be watching.
And really, I guess we can come clean. Honestly, the whole reason we created the podcast was so that way we could end it surprisingly and then tell everyone to get wrecked because they didn't expect it.
Yeah, so expect that at the end of our episode today, when we announce the closing of Get Recc'd. I'm just joking. Please don't leave me. Okay, we're doing a good show here.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, we will be closing Get Recc'd at the end of the episode to open it again for the next episode.
Yeah. So
and the cycle will continue forever.
You'll never know when we're actually ending because we'll tell you we're ending every time, and you'll never know. So keeps you guessing. It's marketing. We know what we're doing. We promise.
Yeah, that's how we get the audience hooked. And it's like the cliffhanger every week. It's like, oh man, is this the last week of the podcast ever? I don't know.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when we go for like 4 weeks without recording, then it's like, oh, it must have been the last one, and then we surprise you again.
Wow. This is great. We should discuss this after the show and talk about this business model. I quite like it.
Yeah, next we're gonna have podcast loot boxes. That's our next big microtransaction play in the podcast. I feel like if we can inject some monetization in the middle of the podcast, we can really get this thing going.
Yeah, for sure. You would all be willing to buy into that, right? Would you give us money? Don't answer that. Anyway, I think we should move into what you recommended to me, Steven, which has nothing to do with what we were talking about before, if that's okay.
Yep, let's do it.
All right, go ahead.
Don, last time I recommended to you Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire is a game that was in early access for a little while, but it technically officially released last year and ended up being published by Humble Bundle, of all things. Slay the Spire is a roguelike deck builder that has become massively influential. Pretty much any day you go on the Steam page, there's a new roguelike deck builder, and they pretty much can all credit their inspiration to Slay the Spire. So with that, I will hand it off to you to talk about it.
Yeah, so there's been a number of roguelike games we've actually talked about, and they are very bite-sized kind of games where you can feel like you got a full experience out of the game from only playing like 30 or 40 minutes, which makes it good for this show for sure. But I would say, aside from Binding of Isaac, which is a game I already loved, I would say this is my favorite one that I've played that you've recommended to me, that I had never played before. It has a lot going for it because I feel like all of the genres that it pulls from, it does really well. Like each of them individually, like it's a very good deck builder. Like building up your deck and discovering new cards and determining like what cards you want, what you don't, and then also having like a card upgrade system where you can go into your deck and change it around a little bit by making certain cards stronger, and you have so many things to think about just there. Like all that entire aspect of the game is like really, really good and very addicting. But then you throw on top of that the roguelike format, just makes it like super super easy to just like come into and play a little bit and then just stop and come back later. But like you always feel like you have a goal. And something that actually makes it kind of similar to something like Binding of Isaac is that it is incredibly challenging. Like once you get to a certain point, like I thus far have not gotten past an Act 2 boss once. It is insane how hard the Act 2 bosses are. But because of that, like when you lose, you go all the way back to the very beginning, and this game's split in acts, so you have multiple bosses to face. I don't know how long it goes up to, but it gives you that drive. So it's like it is very bite-sized, and losing kind of sucks, but it's so easy to just start again and keep going. And then every time you start again, much like Binding of Isaac as well, you never really know how your play is going to end up because you don't know what enemies you're going to encounter, you don't know what bosses you're going to encounter, and of course you don't know what your deck's going to look like next. So it's just like super addicting and like really really fun. And if it is inspiring a whole league of games like it, it's no surprise to me from what I've played.
Yeah, and I think what makes it so thematically great is, as you mentioned, because it's a roguelike, there is a degree of difficulty that comes with that genre. And the progression is really what drives you to continue to play, because it is easy to play. I would say even a full complete run is you're probably looking at maybe an hour of playtime and possibly less. So being able to jump in, lose, and jump in again, take some of what you've learned and then reapply it. I think thematically it's very like the actual idea of actually climbing a spire, like getting deeper and deeper. I think technically you're going down it or you're going up it, who knows, but that is really encapsulates that progression, because once you get to that next level, the sense of accomplishment that you feel for doing so only makes you enjoy the game more. And pretty much all roguelikes are like that, honestly. I mean, we have talked about Binding of Isaac, and that game is very hard. So every time you even get a little bit further, you move the needle even a touch, you feel this greater sense of accomplishment, and then you want to jump back and continue to do so. You talked about the deck building element. I think what lends itself so well to this formula, that deck building approach, which has been around for quite a while. I would say the first like game that really utilized that formula was probably from board games. Maybe you could even technically bring it back to like a draft style format of things like Magic the Gathering, collectible card games. But here it's so well integrated to a virtual game because you have this collection of cards that, first of all, you don't actually have to buy into. They're all available to you from the start, pretty much. I mean, there is some progression, like as you play classes, you unlock more cards for classes, and you get a bigger selection of cards. But for the most part, the actual cards that you get, it's all randomized, and there's nothing that you have to do to really get extra access to those things. And then kind of like the discovery element of like every time you win a fight, you get to discover one of 3 cards that you can add to your deck or not add to your deck, which sometimes is even more important than the addition of cards. All of that really blends together well to kind of this virtual format. You know, you have a character with a health bar, and there's enemies with health bars, and you're trying to whittle them down with a card mechanics. And all of that, I think, is just so brilliantly constructed. And the other thing that I'll mention is like what's so masterful about this game is that the balance is absolutely insane. Like the reason why it was in early access for so long, at least 2 years, if not more, is because the play testing required on every single card and the interaction between all of those cards and how delicate that is. Because like the issue is, in a traditional deck builder, in a physical deck builder, you have a very set selection of cards, and you can understand those cards, how they interact with each other, because most of the time it's not really randomized. Like you're building up a set of cards from a set selection. But with Slay the Spire, every single time you play, the actual selection that's given to you is different. So each of those cards has to very carefully interact with each other. So that way you're never just like straight up screwed. You have cards that have either synergies with other cards, or you have cards that are generally very good. So as you're getting those, you're building out some sort of archetype. All of that is really well designed. And then you, on top of that, you have 4 different classes that you can play from, each of which have their own kind of archetypes and sets of cards. So all of that is just like the cohesion of all of that, and the way that all of that interplays is just really spectacular, honestly.
I definitely agree with all of that. And something that I also really like about the card aspect of the game is that it plays very simple. Like, I have definitely played tabletop games with you where even if they were fun, like there could be so many elements that you take into account with different types of cards and different types of abilities, different types of like collectibles or whatever, where you have so many things to worry about that the learning curve can be pretty extreme, and it can make playing it be a little bit convoluted. But this game, there's like not that much that you need to be considering. I mean, there's more than it looks like on the surface, but but it's never like all in your face at once where you just don't know where to start. It's very simple. And like even by the tutorial you can tell, because the game tells you 2 things. It's like, hey, if there's an attack thing over the enemy, that means they're going to attack you next round. So you want to try to block the amount of attack that you see there. That's it. Like, you block or attack. That's like that's there's a little bit more to it because they can give you effects, and there are a bunch of effects, but the effects are very easy to understand because they have little tool tips. And when it comes down to it, like, it really feels like you are focusing on blocking and attacking, and that's about it. You just have to kind of keep in mind that there are like certain effects being applied to you or them at any given time. But it doesn't feel like you have to think about so many things. Like, it's like, okay, I get what I'm doing, and now it's snappy, you know? And there is...
Yeah, and I think that I would say quickly, just to interject, I would say that the digital format is definitely very beneficial to that as well. There have been quite a number of digital collectible card games that also do a similar thing, where it's like any keywords or any information that you might not know is so easily and readily available to you because it is a digital game. So they can present that information immediately with like tool tips and information, and there's never that burden of knowledge that like a physical game would have, where you have to actually like read a rule book or consult a rule book for some of these things, especially when it comes to keywords, because Slay the Spire does have quite a number of keywords, but one, they're all pretty straightforward. Like, what it says makes logical sense to what it does. And 2, as I mentioned, there's kind of like a tooltip, so you at any time you can easily and quickly understand what that card does.
Yeah, and there's also the UI is also very nice. It's not cluttered at all. Like, it feels like the kind of thing that you wouldn't have to have ever touched any card game in your life, and you can look at the UI and pretty much understand what's going on. And the tooltips definitely help, but I don't even think you need them a lot of the time. Like, it's very visual. It's very much like, okay, I see that, I get it, and you just go. And it's great that that is the case, because if there were a lot of things to constantly be considering and thinking about and trying to remember and whatever, it would really hurt the roguelike element, the pick up and play element of this game, where it's just so snappy and fun and quick, and you can just like you always want to replay. It's because the game plays so easily like that. So that's just something that I really appreciated about it. And also, just like the gameplay itself is just super quick. Like, it is turn-based, but there's nothing slow about it, really. It's like, there can definitely be things with turn-based games where maybe just like the speed that like you have to wait for you to do an attack or an enemy to do an attack can be like just a little bit too much. It can be a little bit taxing, a little bit boring to play. This, I feel like, it's just really, really perfect. It's because everything's laid out so visually, they don't have to bother with like any kind of animations or anything. It's just super simple. It's just like, okay, you do the attack, it's their turn, they do the attack, and it's over in like, 10 seconds tops. It's like just super quick and super snappy. And I think that's what makes it so addicting, is that you can just kind of play it. It doesn't feel like a really huge engagement to play it, even though the task is daunting and it is hard. But yeah.
Yeah, and there are other little design things too that Slay the Spire has now influenced across the roguelike genre, not even the deck building genre, just the genre as a whole. So the idea of having a map with branching paths where you're kind of choosing the direction that you want to take to get to an act boss. So as you play, basically you have branching decisions to either like initiate a combat, which comes with its own drawbacks because you might lose health, or go to a mystery event where you have no idea what could happen. It could be a combat or it could be something good, it could be something bad. Go to a shop where you can buy new cards, or even more importantly, remove cards from your deck that aren't very good. You could heal up at a camp or go fight an elite combat, which gives you a whole bunch of benefit. That idea was really probably most likely taken from FTL, which did it before, but it's integrated so well into this formula where your decisions are so strategic. Like the way that your deck is built, usually you're trying to structure your deck for a boss and also potentially for more combats or more elite combats, which are very helpful. So that all plays very well. And then the thing that Slay the Spire kind of did and then took forward into the rogue-like genre is, and Don, I don't know if this is even available to you yet, but the idea of the Ascension mode. So essentially, after you beat Slay the Spire with any of the characters, you unlock Ascension, which is a harder and harder variant of the game. So, like for instance, at one Ascension level, you get this trash card in your deck that you cannot remove, and it does nothing. So it's just a dead draw. And it, or like for another Ascension, they just might give the basic enemies more attack or something like that. So there's like this. So after you beat it, there's still this kind of progression that you can work towards until you get to the very top level, which in this game is Ascension 20, where every single decision that you make is so critically important because it is so absolutely hard. And that Ascension idea is really great because, it kind of continues to give you something to work towards. Generally, the problem that can happen with roguelikes, although there are definitely games that do the opposite, like for instance, Binding of Isaac doesn't have anything like that, and that game is infinitely replayable. But one thing that can happen with roguelikes is, as replayable as they are, once you get so good at it, it is sometimes hard to lose. So it's interesting that you can play a mode that keeps building and keeps getting harder and also continues to make you better, to the point where when you master Ascension 20, it's like an unbelievable feat, honestly. So that's really great, and that's been moved forward into, for instance, Hades came out recently, and they have a mode like that. Monster Train has a mode like that. Other roguelikes are kind of attaching onto that idea because it is a really great idea. Because the other thing is, you can always move that needle up or down if you want to make the game easier or harder. And what I find so interesting about that type of mechanic is once you get to A20 and potentially beat A20 and then go back to like the base Ascension, it's like, it's a breeze. It's like, why did I ever even think this was difficult? Like I can just run through this like nothing. And really that's more a testament to your own ability, which I think is so cool, because this is definitely a game that is one of those easy to learn, incredibly, incredibly hard to master games. So being able to actually see your own progression in it is really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to briefly touch on what I don't like about the game, which is a pretty minor thing for me, but I do feel like the presentation of the game is just okay. Like, if I had to say anything where I'm like, that didn't necessarily impress me, like, presentation-wise, it's all right. Like, the art style is, it's decent. It looks like kind of like a glorified Flash game, especially with some of the animations that kind of look like basic puppet animations. Not really the best. But the good news about that is that, like, I mean, the game still looks pretty nice. And again, because the UI is so easy to understand and so, like, inviting, it kind of just makes none of that really matter at all. Like, it's like, yeah, it doesn't look amazing. It doesn't have, like, a super flashy art style or anything, but, like, okay, it's like still super fun. So
Yeah, and I think that is honestly the common criticism and my criticism as well. There are other deck builders that have kind of branched off of Slay the Spire that definitely look a lot better. The presentation quality is just so much nicer. But it kind of does help Slay the Spire's charm, honestly, that it looks like it does. And it made it very easily transferable to things like mobile. Like you can definitely tell this is like on mobile, it looks great, but
yeah, yeah,
on PC, it just, as you mentioned, it kind of looks like basically a flash game. And and even the card art, I don't really find all that interesting. And they don't really do much with the card art either. Like I know a lot of digital card games, they have some sort of animation or cool flair in the art itself, and none of that's even present here. It's all very static. But the design is just so immaculate that it's easy to look over.
for sure. Yeah, and that with that, I'm pretty much ready to wrap it up, assuming that you are.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I really liked this game. I'm going to play it more. Like I've said that with other games that I've been recommended that like I may or may not. I haven't really revisited any of those though. But this game is super fun, and I want to play it more, and I want to get farther. Because in the amount that I've played for this, I didn't get far enough. It's just really good. If I had to score it right now, I'd say like I don't know, like an 8 or an 8.5 probably. But I mean, I don't know. I could end up loving it even more the more and more I play it. So that's a bit of a temporary score. But yeah, I do recommend this game absolutely. I think it's super fun. I think it's just a blast to play. I think it's really addicting, and it does remind me of something like Binding of Isaac in just like how much fun it is to just turn on and play some. And they're both roguelikes, so I guess there is a similarity. But yeah.
And I probably give it a 9, maybe even as much as a 9.5, honestly. I just think that it's such a mechanics driven game, and that really resonates with me. And the mechanics here are so precise and so well designed. And then on top of that, it's just fun to go through runs and find new cards and find crazy, super overpowered combos with your cards, doing things like getting your armor up to levels that the enemy can't even touch you, and stuff like that. It's just really fun to play around all of that. The only reason why I'd probably knock it a little bit is, one, as we talked about, the presentation isn't that great, and there are actually roguelike deck builders that have come after Slay the Spire that I like more than Slay the Spire, interestingly enough. So because of that, I feel like that knocks Slay the Spire down just a tad for me. I do think that others have taken this concept and kind of branched it out in really interesting ways, but for just a core concept as clean as Slay the Spire is, it is just an incredible game, and I definitely recommend it.
All right, great. So we'll move on to what I recommended to you then.
Yep, let's do it.
Okay, so last time I recommended to Steven the Marvin Gaye album, What's Going On. I believe that when I recommended this, I mentioned the new Rolling Stone list, which placed this at number 1. That's not something that matters at all to me too much, really. Like, I definitely don't want that to be the topic of discussion. Who cares? But I think it inspired me personally to actually sit down with this album more than I had before. And I think it, makes it worth talking about as a bit of a timely piece, although it is timely for many, 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 many more reasons than just that. But with that, I will let Steven begin.
Yeah, I think quickly I just do want to touch on that, though, because I was looking at the Wikipedia article, and apparently what had happened is the 2020 revised list was a list created by musicians and not music critics. Yeah. So that revised 500 greatest albums was actually a musicians list, not necessarily a critics list. So I wonder if the Rolling Stone critics would agree, or if they still put Sgt. Pepper at number 1, but obviously no way to really know that. So with that aside, because I don't really know if there's much more to talk about there, I have heard this album once or twice before, but I don't know if I really gave it its due diligence as much as I did now. And especially, as you've already alluded to, it's incredibly prescient for the time that we are currently in. It's so moving. It is such a very powerful album that resonated with me again to this day. even from the first time that I heard it, but now this time especially. I think that what's so great about it is it's very sonically pleasing. It is a very symphonic album. It's very easy to listen to, and it flows so well from start to finish, very purposefully. I mean, literally, like each track pretty much flows into the next, and then the whole album kind of even wraps around on itself, which is thematically interesting because the album really is about kind of like a war vet coming home and then essentially like sending off another person to war. So it's like this endless cycle. But each of these tracks here are so catchy, so I don't know if I would say necessarily poppy, but that soul R&B style is just, it fits so well to the theme because it really draws you in each of the tracks, and especially all the instrumentation and background vocalization. All of that really draws you in and makes you want to understand the message and listen to the message. And the message is very powerful. And it is kind of, I don't know if I would necessarily call it like a concept album, although I think it like kind of is. As I mentioned, it's supposed to be a war vet who's kind of talking about, he's coming home and then talking about his experience and trying to understand what America has become while he's gone. And all of that just is track to track very interesting, and the message just continues to build, and you understand kind of like their assumed fall into drugs, and then talking about, you know, and using that as a medium to talk about just generally like the larger issues of America of the time. But all of that is just wrapped so well in what is essentially like a very kind of poppy R&B soul album. A lot of the singles here got radio play, which is kind of interesting to think about, but also kind of powerful as well. So I don't know if everyone who heard this on the radio actually understood what was happening, but that it got that level of play and that it got a Motown release of all things as well. It's like that makes that message that much greater. And I think when we talked about, I don't necessarily want to bring it up again, but I just wanted to say, I think when we talked about Kendrick, I kind of had mentioned that I felt like that album was today's What's Going On. And what's interesting is like now listening to What's Going On again, it's like, I feel like What's Going On is today's What's Going On because it's still so relevant and such a powerful message.
Yeah, and what you mentioned about Motown's interesting because Motown did not want to release this at all. Like, prior to this album, Marvin Gaye was not an albums artist. I mean, nobody on Motown was prior to this. Like Stevie Wonder ended up releasing some, you know, albums after this. I believe they were all after this. But prior to What's Going On, you know, they were a singles machine, and so was Marvin Gaye. You know, he was a great singer, and a great songwriter too. And like that was about it. And so when he comes with like this song, What's Going On, you know, and it's like, it's about the actual times they were living in, and it was political, and it was so much of a statement. They were like scared to release that. It just didn't seem like it was something that people would want to hear, and of course that was wrong. Because I think like that song in particular, the title track, is such a perfect rallying cry for what it's like to just live in a time that's filled with so much chaos and confusion and just political dissidence all the time. And of course, for Black communities, that's like very much like that's a lot of their lives, which this album touches on with stuff like Inner City Blues, which is all about that. So I mean, as a Motown release, it makes even more sense. It's almost amazing that they could hear that song and think like, you know, there's no way this is gonna sell. There's no way that it's like, because it is such a human response to all of these issues. You know, like you can have a political album that attempts to say something expressly political for the artist to tell you, you know, what they think about these issues. But Marvin Gaye's, at least in this song, is just kind of like, you know, what the hell, you know, like he's just all across this album. There's just this main wish that that all of us can find love and we can find peace and we can come together. But it's just like, how the hell can we do that with everything? And I think that's really the main core message of this album, as Marvin Gaye across these songs just sings incredibly, by the way, just like so passionately trying to discover like that peace within himself and how we can bring it to the world. And of course his answer is religion and spirituality, but he presents so many alternative solutions across this record. Like, it can be spirituality, it can be religion, but it can also just be understanding and love and things as simple as that. And maybe a message that simple in the hands of a lesser artist could come across corny, but that is the last thing you could say for Marvin Gaye's message here. It is so passionate and so relatable, that you just end up feeling with him so much, and it's like, it's got this real power to it, I think, that that he brings out just because of how it's explored here, and sonically, of course, but I'll maybe get into that later.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I think power in his vocals and then power in the instrumentation as well. There's so much going on track to track. You have some ballads, you have some soul, you have some funk, you have almost everything, a little bit of jazz in there as well, and all of that instrumentation really just, as I mentioned, continues to draw you in on every single track. My favorite is the washboard. I really enjoyed the washboard. But other than the washboard, I mean, everything else is amazing too. And then, as I mentioned, there's some great backup vocalization on some of the tracks as well. It's just such a, like, the message aside, it's just such a powerful soul album, like R&B album. They're so sonically, it's just so easy to listen to all the way through. And it's not a very long album either, and which I think helps it. I think that's to its benefit, because it's also hard to stretch out a message for longer than I feel like Marvin Gaye does here. And I think that message is really resonating because it is so poignant and it is so powerful on every track.
Yeah, and I do have things to say. Well, I guess I'll briefly say, like, yeah, this whole album has orchestrations on every song, compositions, strings, string arrangements, choir arrangements, and then there's some jazz arrangements too, like on the end of Save the Children, which is one of my favorite moments on this record, where everything just kind of builds into this glorious like jazz climax. And yeah, there are a lot of influences. You do have funk on like Ride On, which is a real groovin' song, but these arrangements are incredible. Like, not only are the songs themselves fantastic, they have great hooks, amazing singing, great guitar playing, great percussion, but then you add these string and choir arrangements, and this thing takes on this heavenly, otherworldly quality, especially on like a song like Flying High in the Friendly Sky, which is kind of a psychedelic detour on this record, where he begins talking about drug use, and how drug use is his and this veteran's escape from everything that's going on. And the song that musically accompanies that with this really free-flowing and psychedelic atmosphere. So it goes a lot of places, which only makes it all the more impressive that the whole thing is so purposefully orchestrated, crafted, and also designed from an album perspective, with the songs flowing song to song. You essentially have like two medleys here with each side, and all of that is just so incredibly well done. And yes, also like super, super pleasant. It's something that you would hope to look for out of a soul album, I would assume, would be something that's easy listening. And this absolutely is. But it is that while still remaining so attention-grabbing. Like, just with everything that's going on, it's so rich and dense with instrumentation that it's like you cannot take your ears off and you cannot take your ears off of it and stop hearing like all of the subtle details that are in every single track, which is really what impresses me the most about it, is that it is just so dense and like there is so much to hear in this 37-minute runtime or whatever.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, there are parts in this album that are purely instrumentals. And as I was listening to those, I was like, I feel like this album would be just as good if it was purely an instrumental record, because the compositions on every single track are just incredible, and then only made better by Marvin Gaye's lyrics and his singing and everything else on top of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's just huge compliments to the producers and the production here, because it is just immaculate and it holds up wonderfully today. The mixing job, I mean, with all of the instruments that are layered here, you get this beautiful wall of sound that you can actually pick all of the instruments out of still. It's just super, super impressive. And something else I really wanted to make sure that I mentioned here was that, we were talking about the social aspect of this album, and one of the most amazing things to me about this is the song Mercy, Mercy Me, The Ecology, which, is my favorite song here. It's just incredible. One of the biggest hits off of this album as well. And this song is an environmentalist anthem, essentially, which, not that wasn't something that people were talking about in the 70s. Of course, on this song, you're not really hearing about climate change or anything. You're hearing about pollution and things like that, which were topics that people were aware of back then. But it is just yet another way in which, like, you can see how, like, prophetic of an album this is, and not just prescient. It's like prophetic. Like, yes, these were issues that were happening then, absolutely, and listening to this album can give you a perfect glimpse into the political atmosphere of its time, but it does just as good of a job of setting up, how the hell we got here. And it's like one of those things that just makes you wonder, like, what Marvin Gaye would be thinking today, to see how these issues have culminated now. And a song like Mercy, Mercy Me in particular, where I'm just like, it's just like, wow, it's like, it was bad then, everybody then knew, like, this was bad. Well, maybe not everybody, but this song was a huge hit. It was bad then, and it's only gotten worse, but it is, like, in a way, just because this album provides that hope and that sense of wonder and hope for the future on some level, despite the despair that is definitely on certain songs here, it makes this an album that you can listen to and you can really feel inspired to, like, just hope for the better, which is something that only gets harder and harder to do. So I think, like, an album like this, just having it around and having it still matter today is just super important.
Yeah, and each component is just so great too. I mean, as you mentioned, there's a lot of messages here. There's multiple layers, multiple avenues for potentially, like, creating a solution, essentially. And all of those are they sound pretty straightforward, but the way that they're expressed is just so powerful and so profound. And I do want to mention, because you just mentioned it, I do want to mention that Wikipedia even says that this album was credited with promoting awareness of ecological issues before the public outcry over them had become prominent.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I think
you definitely have some stuff in the 70s, but much later than this, because you definitely get, like, Pave Paradise. I don't remember the name of the song, but you know the one I'm talking about. You get stuff like that where ecological issues, pest control, all that sort of stuff, pollution, that all comes into the kind of public consciousness, but not really this early into the 70s. Coming out of the 60s, you have different issues, and with the Vietnam War still occurring, obviously, but just interesting to see, like, what was on top of mind.
Yeah, I definitely misspoke when I had said that, like, everybody was talking about it, but I mean, like, it was a problem that people were aware of, but it's like, yeah, I mean, raising awareness is fantastic, and again, it just I don't know, it's one of those things that just makes me wonder, where it's just like, look at how much worse that's gotten. But yeah, no, I mean, in general, like, I think that it just like I say, it's like a time capsule for its time, but it suits just as well to ours. And of course, there's the whole war element, which we haven't even touched on too much.
Stephen did mention that a lot of the songs are from the perspective of a war veteran, which I have heard that claim that it was like supposed to be a story album about that, but I haven't found that corroborated everywhere. And when you read all the lyrics, it's kind of hard to tell. There are definitely some songs though that do go there, especially in the first side, like with What's Happening, Brother, which is exclusively about that war veteran returning home. And it is one of the elements of this album that I think does ground it more in its time, although let's not act like that's still not relevant either, because it absolutely is. But you can very much tell that this record came out of the Vietnam War and the end of the Vietnam War. And it's like...
Just quickly, I was going to interject. What's interesting about it is it's not necessarily a protest song, album, there were others that were actively protesting the Vietnam War. There were a lot of protest songs coming out specifically against the Vietnam War, and this is such a different angle of outcry and protest, where it's not necessarily an active defamation of the war, but it is definitely talking about and creating awareness of what it can do, which in itself is just as powerful as a message as something like a CCR track or something like that,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, and that is a lot of this record too, is just he's observing what's happening in the world. He's observing what's going on, and trying to just figure out what to make of that, both for himself in his own religion and for the world and the country and just everything. There's so much, it's very observational in that sense. And I will second 100% that is just as effective, if not sometimes more so. It is clear that what he thinks about it, no one's left wondering wow, that he didn't even make a statement. He did, absolutely. But I think the key thing that you can take away from this is wow, we really do need to find some kind of path forward in it. It is like I say, it's a human reaction to it, because he's not so much talking about the issues themselves so much as his reaction to these issues, which is so similar to how so many people can feel when you just look at the news any day, And yeah, I think that's really what makes this such a powerful record, is that it's more than just a protest album. Even if you are going to call it that, it just feels like it speaks to something more that I haven't heard, honestly, a lot of records, songs, or anything really tackle quite as well.
Well, I think I've kind of said my piece on it. I don't know. Do you have anything else to talk about?
I think we can wrap it up, yeah.
Okay. So I absolutely love this album. I think it's just so powerful. I think it's so easy to listen to, so sonically pleasing. Marvin Gaye's lyrics and vocals are just so moving and so nice to listen to that it's hard to not recommend this album, honestly. And then on top of that, you have just a really great message. So lyrically, it's very interesting and it really keeps you engaged, and all of that kind of combines together to really keep you hooked for what is not a very long runtime. I think I would go so far as to say I give this album a 10. I just absolutely 100% recommend anyone listen to it. I think it's incredibly prescient, even for today's time, to listen to. And I definitely, absolutely 100% cannot stress enough recommend it.
Yeah, I second every single point. I also give this album a 10. I think that it is genius. I think that it is super, super well structured, super tight as an album, incredibly well produced and composed. His singing is just amazing, and the songs across this thing are so good. It really is an all-timer for sure. And yeah, absolutely, I recommend it. I think that I'm in the place now where I want to get more into soul and more into R&B and Motown and all of these things that I've missed because I used to just sort of be closed off to them, which was not fair at all. But I know, as somebody who doesn't really listen to much soul or even R&B in general prior to now, or prior to when I heard this way back when, this is such a readily accessible album to anybody because there is like so much to it, and it's one of those things you hear and it just makes you want to hear more like this wherever it is. And so I don't think there's any barriers to entry for this album at all. I think it's just fantastic, and everybody should listen to it.
Yeah, quickly, I'll just say that is such a great descriptor, and that really, I think that goes for both of what we talked about today. It's like both of these things that we talked about in today's episode are things that you listen to or play where you get that little sample of something so great that you want more wherever it is. Now, both these things that we talked about today are really great on their own, so you could just, continue to consume them, but they're so great because as you listen or play, you want to consume more, which I think is very powerful.
Yeah, so I think we should move on to the recommendations, and we'll start with you, Stephen.
Okay,
Oh,
so quickly, I
yes.
guess I'll just say our next episode is our spooky ooky Halloween episode. So get ready to get spooked, everybody.
I wonder how they're going to get spooked. I'm trying to think of a way in which they might be spooked in our next episode, and I can't come up with it. So y'all are just going to have to wait and be surprised.
Get ready for the jump scares in your podcast. And with that, I will, speaking of jump scares, recommend to you the game that launched 1,000 Let's Plays, Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's is a survival horror point-and-click game released in 2014. Honestly, kind of the small budget Marvel of the time, and has had many, many iterations since. But we're going to talk about the first iteration, Five Nights at Freddy's.
So just to be clear, we are talking about the game and not the Living Tombstone song, right?
We are talking about the game, Five Nights at Freddy's.
Okay, fantastic, because I was a little... Anyway, I have to recommend to you a movie, and this is a film. It is called Dead Alive in the US, and it is called Brain Dead everywhere else. It was directed by Peter Jackson. This movie came out in 1992, and it is often considered one of, if not the goriest films of all time. Just spectacularly bloody and gory, which is really what you want on Halloween. Yeah, so we're gonna scare the pants off of our viewers next time, to use a great little silly expression. It is going to be just horrifying. So I hope you will join us.
Make sure next time you're wearing a second pair of pants, so when your first pair of pants gets scared off of you, you're still wearing some pants.
Yeah, especially if you're in public, because that could be a problem.
Yeah, it would get really awkward if you're listening to us on Castbox, which we are on still, where you can download our podcast, listen to it offline if you so choose. Listen to it in the car. It's easier than spinning up YouTube, although I guess you could technically download the YouTube VODs as well, but we are on Castbox, so if you're out in public on Castbox for the next episode, make sure that you are cognizant of the fact that you're going to get the spooked.
And of course, if you are listening on Castbox, we stream on YouTube. We stream these episodes on the YouTube channel casting_404. So you can look that up, search that, and then Get Recc'd, and you'll find the channel there. You can subscribe, and these episodes, come out. We'll stream them every 2 or 3 weeks. So you can join us live if you would like.
Yes, and I think I mentioned last time that if you have not yet joined us live, I definitely recommend you join us live for the next episode, because typically our VODs and our streams, while we do have stuff actually on the stream that you can see, and sometimes we even reference it in the next episode, there will definitely be something going on. So I would definitely recommend tuning into the stream if you can.
Yeah, or just watching the VOD after, either way. But who knows what those spooks will be next time? I can't say. But as for this episode, those were our thoughts. those were our recommendations. Get Recc'd.